Hey everyone, it's Tuesday. In case you didn't get the chance to look at the date today. So we just found out yesterday that we are not going to be back in school, which is like, I don't know, pretty disappointing to me. And we got to see you guys, and it's just a bummer. So I hope it's kind of helpful to have like at least answers. So we can plan and kind of know what's going on instead of being in this weird state of like, what's going on, we don't know. So we'll continue with how things have been going. So I'll keep reading stories, keep sharing mysteries, and just making the best of what we got, I guess. So, all right, so today's story is another G.K. Chesterton. This one is called A Piece of Chalk. Okay? It was written in 1909. I remember one splendid morning, all blue and silver, in the summer holiday when I reluctantly tore myself away from the task of doing nothing in particular and put on a hat of some sort and picked up a walking stick and put 6 very bright colored chalks in my pocket. I then went into the kitchen, which along with the rest of my house belonged to a very square and sensible old woman in a Sussex village, and asked the owner and the occupant of the kitchen if she had any brown paper. She had a great deal. In fact, she had too much, and she mistook the purpose and the rationale of the existence of brown paper. She seemed to have the idea that if a person wanted brown paper, he must be wanting to tie up parcels, which was the last thing I wanted to do. Indeed, it was a thing that I have found to be beyond my mental capacity. Hence, she dwelt very much on the varying qualities of toughness and endurance of the material. I explained to her that I only wanted to draw on it, and that I did not want them to endure in the least, and that from my point of view, therefore, it was a question not of tough consistency, but of responsive surface, a thing comparatively irrelevant in a parcel. When she understood that I wanted to draw, she offered to overwhelm me with note paper, apparently supposing that I did my notes and correspondence on old brown paper wrappers for motives of economy. So he's like arguing with this woman who thinks that he needs to use his paper to wrap up parcels and it's strong and sturdy, and he just wants to draw on it because he likes the way it like works with chalks. And now she was worried that he doesn't have any real paper, and she's trying to give him real paper and thinks that he writes everything on brown paper. I then tried to explain the rather delicate logical shade that I not only liked brown paper, but I liked the quality of the brownness of the paper, just as I liked the quality of brownness of October woods, or in beer, or in peat streams in the north. Brown paper represents the primal twilight of the first toil of creation, and with a bright colored chalk or two, you can pick out points of fire in it, sparks of gold and blood red and sea green, like the first fierce stars that sprang out of divine darkness. All this I said in an offhand way to the old woman as I put the brown paper in my pocket along with the chalks and possibly other things. I suppose everyone must have reflected on how primeval and how poetic things are that one carries in one's pocket. The pocket knife, for instance, the type of all human tools, the infant of the sword. Once I planned to write a book of poems entirely about the things in my pockets, but I found it would be too long, and the age of the great epics is past. With my stick and my chalk, my stick and my knife, my chalks and my brown paper, I went out to the great downs. I crawled across those colossal contours that express the best quality of England, because they are at the same time soft and strong. The smoothness of them has the same meaning as the smoothness of great cart horses or the smoothness of the beech trees. It declares in the teeth of our timid and cruel theories that the mighty are merciful. As my eye swept the landscape was as kindly as any of its cottages, but for power it was like an earthquake. The villages in the immense valley were safe. One could see for centuries, yet the lifting of the whole land was like the lifting of one's enormous wave to wash them all away. I crossed one swell of living turf after another, looking for a place to sit down and draw. Do not, for heaven's sake, imagine that I was going to sketch from nature. I was going to draw devils and seraphim and blind old gods that men worshipped before the dawn of right, and saints in robes of angry crimson and seas of rage, seas of strange green, and all the sacred or monstrous symbols that look so well in bright colors on brown paper. They are much better worth drawing than nature. Also, they are much easier to draw. When a cow came slouching by in the field next to me, a mere artist would have drawn it. But I always get wrong in the hind legs or the quadrupeds. So I know the soul of the cow. So I drew the soul of a cow, which I saw there plainly walking before me in the sunlight. And the soul was all purple and silver, and had 7 horns, and the mystery that belonged to all the beasts. But though I could not, with a crayon, get the best out of the landscape, it does not follow that the landscape was not getting the best out of me. That is, I think, this, I think, is the mistake that people make about the old poets who lived before Wordsworth and were supposed not to care very much about nature because they did not describe it much. They preferred writing about great men to writing about great hills, but they sat on the great hills to write. They gave out much less about nature, but they drank in perhaps much more. They painted the white robes of their holy virgins with the blinding snow at which they had stared all day. They blazoned the shield of their paladins with the purple and gold of many heraldic sunsets. The greenness of 1,000 green leaves clustered into a live green figure of Robin Hood. The blueness of the score of forgotten skies became the blue robes of the Virgin. The inspiration went in like sunbeams and came out like Apollo. So he's thinking about how people would expect him to just draw nature, so it's because he's out in nature, and maybe some people think that that's the best kind of drawing to do, but he's saying how he gets his inspiration from nature, and other writers did to write about these great characters, or how the pieces of nature inspire them to see this similar qualities in these characters or figures, I guess. But as I sat scrawling these silly figures on brown paper, it began to dawn on me, to my great disgust, that I had left one chalk, and that a most exquisite and essential chalk behind. I searched all my pockets, but I could not find any white chalk. Now those who are acquainted with all the philosophy, nay, religion, which is typified in the art of drawing on brown paper, know that white is positive and essential. I cannot avoid remarking here upon moral significance. One of the wise and awful truths which this brown paper art reveals is this, that white is a color. It's not a mere absence of color. It is a shining and affirmative thing, as fierce as red, as definitive as black. When, so to speak, your pencil grows red hot, it draws roses. When it grows white hot, it draws stars. And one of the 2 or 3 defiant viridities of the best religious morality of real Christianity, for example, is the same thing. The cheap assertion of religious morality is that white is a color. Virtue is not the absence of vices or the avoidance of moral dangers. Virtue is a vivid and separate thing, like pain or particular smell. Mercy does not mean not being cruel or separating people, revenge, or sparing people revenge or punishment. It means a plain and positive thing like the sun, which one has either seen or not seen. In a word, God paints in many colors, but he never paints so gorgeously. I had almost said so gaudily as when he paints in white. In a sense, our age has realized this fact and expressed it in our solemn costume. For if it were really true that white was blank and colorless thing, negative and non-committal, then white would be used instead of black or gray for the funeral dress of this pessimistic period. When we should see city gentlemen in frock coats of spotless silver linen, with top hats as white as wonderful arum lilies, which is not the case. Meanwhile, I could not find my chalk. So he goes on this whole tangent about like how powerful white, the color white is, and that it actually is a color, and trying to combat this idea that like it's just a blank, plain existence. Like there actually is like meaning behind it, and all this ponderings that one might have when they're looking for white chalk. I sat on the hill in a sort of despair. There was no town nearer than Chesterton, at which it was even remotely probable that there would be such a thing as an artist's colorman. And yet without white, my absurd little pictures would be as pointless as the world would be if there was no good people in it. I stared stupidly around, racking my brain for expedients. Then I suddenly stood up and roared with laughter again and again, so that the cows stared at me and called a committee. Imagine a man in the Sahara regretting that he had no sand for his hourglass. Imagine a gentleman in mid-ocean wishing that he had brought some salt water with him for his chemical experiments. I was sitting on an immense warehouse of white chalk. The landscape was made entirely out of white chalk. White chalk was piled more miles until I met the sky. I stooped and broke a piece of chalk off of the rock I sat on. It did not mark so well as the chalk shops do, but it gave the effect. And I stood there in a trance of pleasure, realizing that this southern England is not only a grand peninsula and a tradition and a civilization, it's something even more admirable. It is a piece of chalk. So the ending just amuses me so much because he's like realizing that he was sitting on this piece of stone that would work just as well as this white chalk, and he's like, how stupid of me, like it's been here this whole time. I would be like a guy in the Sahara who needed sand, and there's just sand everywhere. And then I just love the comparison of how he's like, this magnificent country is a big piece of chalk, because it's like all the stone that they're built on. So and it kind of brought me back to days of childhood, like when you would find different like types of stone that could draw on like a sidewalk or a driveway, and they're useful. It's not just a little stone or something. So yeah, and I just love his perspective and how he was able to like take something that was so simple and even silly and just like look at it in a different way and kind of take it in a deep direction. So if you're sitting around looking for something, maybe if you open your eyes a little bit, you might find something that's a good substitute that you never expected. So, all right, let's move on to a mystery. Okay. See if you can solve this one. It's called baubles, like B-A-U-B-L-E-S, like not bubbles. An old-fashioned bell rang out when Dr. J.L. Quicksolve turned the knob and opened the door to an old jewelry store. The store owner, Barry Opal, greeted Dr. Quicksolve with a handshake. The jeweler suspected his clerk after the third robbery in 6 months. All 3 robberies had taken place while the same clerk was working alone in the jewelry store. Mr. Opal asked Dr. Quicksolve to question him. After the first 2 robberies, the clerk explained to Dr. Quicksolve, I decided to bring my gun to work. I'm pretty good with a pistol, and I wear it here under my jacket. I just did not get a chance to use it. The thief had a gun, or at least he said he did. He had his hand in his pocket and couldn't get a chance with his hand, and I couldn't get a chance with his hand already on a gun like that. If I had any chance to get the drop on him, it would have stopped this robbery and saved my life. Saved my job. He's alive. I'll never forget what he looked like, tall, bald-headed, with a big handlebar mustache. I'll probably be fired now, even though I didn't have anything to do with the robbery. It's just been bad luck that I've been here when the place gets robbed. I understand the thief got away with quite a lot this time, Dr. Quicksolve commented. Yeah, 2 large bags of jewels. He could hardly carry it all, but he wasn't about to let go of them. We had just recently replenished our stocks from the last robbery. We were even stocked up for an extra sale, the clerk exclaimed. and I don't know what I'll do if I lose this job. At least you'll have a place to stay and 3 square meals a day, Dr. Quicksolve said. What did Dr. Quicksolve mean? Okay, so what do we think here? So it's this old-fashioned jewelry store that's had 3 robberies in the past 6 months. And the same clerk has been working by himself every time it's happened. After the first 2 robberies, this guy, the clerk, decided to bring a gun to work with him, kept it under his jacket. And when this robber came in, he had his hand in this gun in his pocket. And the guy didn't want to risk it. He didn't want to like shoot him if the guy was carrying a gun or had it like ready to go, I guess. He was tall, bald-headed, with a handlebar mustache. He just says it's bad luck that he's here whenever the place is robbed. The guy got away with 2 big bags of jewels and could hardly carry it all. How did you catch him? I don't know, it doesn't say. So what do you think? Why does Dr. Quicksolve kind of question his story? 328. Okay. So when Dr. Quicksolve said, you'll have a place to stay in 3 square meals a day, that means jail, probably. So he meant the clerk was probably headed for jail. It sounds like he was lying when he said he never had a chance to pull the gun and get the drop on the thief. Dr. Quicksolve could not picture how a bandit could carry 2 heavy bags of jewels and turn the knob to open the door with one hand kept in his pocket with the gun. So I guess the way the guy was describing it, he had like these 2 big bags, has to open a door, and supposedly is like holding on to this gun inside of his pocket at the same time. So that's kind of a lot for one person to be doing. So Dr. Quicksolve does not believe it. So it's kind of a good one. It's not bad. Pretty believable. All right, we'll wrap up with some riddles. I keep going back to the same section. Oh, some of these are just really bad. Why did the sheriff arrest the chicken? Because he used foul language. That one is really bad. What kind of bars won't keep a prisoner in jail? What kind of bars won't keep a prisoner in jail? Probably a lot of them, but chocolate bars. Chocolate bars would not keep a prisoner in jail. They just eat it and they'd be free, and then it'd be a weird jail. All right, guys, have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.